Hello, and thank you for joining today's acquisition seminar hosted by the Federal Acquisition Institute. Today's seminar, entitled Innovations in Acquisitions, will offer valuable insight and useful information on great innovations occurring throughout the federal acquisition community. Agencies are taking a hard look at their buying practices, particularly when it comes to information technology. But where do you start, and what should you expect? This seminar will talk about key initiatives and policy and give real-world examples and practical steps from leading practitioners. Whether your agency is just beginning its innovation journey or it's ready to move up to the next level, this seminar will present concrete tools, techniques, and real-world examples of what to do, how to do it, and what to think about as you look to increase innovation, reduce duplication, and deliver services more efficiently. To explore innovations in acquisitions, we have invited representatives from several federal agencies for some presentations and live discussions about what they're doing to enhance acquisitions across the federal government. Let's get started with Eliana Zavala from the Office of Federal Procurement Policy with a brief overview presentation. She joins us to talk about recent policy updates and initiatives aimed at implementing innovative acquisition solutions.
As a government-wide procurement advisor to departments and agencies on a variety of innovative acquisition matters, my projects include developing policies, practices, and workforce tools that facilitate innovation in the federal acquisition system. As we'll learn here, these steps are increasingly important in today's environment of reducing burden to agencies and developing a government-wide reform plan to better meet mission needs and increase value to the taxpayer. Innovation is looking ahead at the cutting edge of business practices, testing new ideas, and managing risk. Innovation is also deciding how much new you do compared to the existing process or strategy, infusing new ideas in agencies, and revitalizing underutilized techniques. I should also mention that modernization in acquisitions is scaling tools to appropriate use and adoption by all offices. The common denominator between acquisition innovation and modernization is giving people the tools to get better results. There are several ways agencies are testing new and better techniques to execute innovative acquisition practices. For instance, with the support of acquisition innovation advocates, agencies are developing and adopting new and modern acquisition strategies. The advocates are designated agency resources representing departments and agencies, and they are helping to migrate the federal acquisition system to a modern acquisition state, with an emphasis on reduced delivery time, improved customer and vendor satisfaction, saved and lowered transaction costs, and increased access to innovative contractors. Organized around communities of practice, the acquisition innovation advocates promote the dissemination of practices and tools and encourage dynamic learning in the workforce. Another example of how agencies are testing new and better acquisition techniques is by standing up acquisition labs. We have seen pockets of success with this mechanism, and with senior level support, acquisition ideas are tested, iterated, adopted, and iterated some more. Emerging practices become best practices and even established practices. There are many other examples that demonstrate how agencies are accelerating the development of innovative acquisition capabilities. Agencies' acquisition business processes are shifting, resulting in a more responsive federal acquisition system. We are seeing the change by tying cost, schedule, and performance goals to achieve end results, making product owners accountable for good performance goals and adjusting when necessary, such as through project management, and bringing stakeholders together at the beginning of the acquisition process and seeing the positive effects throughout the acquisition lifecycle. For instance, an integrated procurement team at the United States Citizen and Immigration Services reduced time to award of a multi-million-dollar contract to upgrade a legacy system with a focus on post-award contractor performance and user-centered experience. From acquisition planning through award, the Acquisition Innovation Lab supported the team who was empowered to make collaborative, innovative decisions, such as requesting same-day technical demonstrations by offerers, replacing submission of written technical proposals. Another example worth noting is the Interagency Facilitated Requirements Development Workshop that's Department of Defense, the General Services Administration, and the Office of Personnel Management participated in, amongst other entities. Led by a trained facilitator, the team followed a step-by-step process for building requirements, performance standards, and inspection plans in just 4 days for a government-wide blanket purchase agreement. Looking forward, there are several ways for agencies to get engaged in order to replicate these best practices, and where the workforce can go to get more information. Contact your Acquisition Innovation Advocate. Participate in and contribute to rapid information sharing. Visit the Acquisition Gateway Innovation Portal, which includes acquisition innovation sites, guidance documents, and award programs. Use open opportunities to offer expertise and request expertise, such as through brief exchanges. And share best practices and experiences with your Acquisition Innovation Advocate.
As Eliana mentioned, we have agency practitioners from the Office of Personnel Management and the Department of Homeland Security to share some real-life applications of how agencies are implementing innovative approaches in their acquisitions. Let's hear from them now. Joining us today from the Office of Personnel Management is Greg Blaschko. Thanks for being here, Greg.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Being able to communicate acquisition innovation efforts through this particular outlet is exciting.
Fantastic. As an Acquisition Innovation Advocate Council team member, could you tell us what the AIA Council is and how you're trying to leverage AIA Council topics and initiatives to enhance your agency's procurement operations?
Certainly. The Council's been excellent. Matthew, Ileana, Ursula, they've really pushed us to expand our mindset and to really drive towards not just innovation, but towards better outcomes through more effective and efficient processes and procedures. OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, is a relatively small CFO Act agency, and our mission is critical to that of the success of the federal government. So recently, we've been focusing more on requirements development, and as mentioned earlier in the webinar, the use of structured engagements and facilitator support services.
Fantastic. Now, regarding your focus on requirements development, the utilization of a structured engagement approach, and in certain instances, secured contracted facilitator support, could you explain the approach, how it was developed, and how it's been applied?
So at OPM, we've developed a structured approach that in large part leverages various aspects of the agency, contracting, program office, obviously, general counsel, security, IT, finance. We've also implemented, as you mentioned, the contracted facilitator support. So those particular efforts have really helped us recognize benefit.
Fantastic. So I understand there's a really good example supporting the agency's background investigation program. How was that event structured? What parties were involved, and what was the intended outcome?
Yeah, that particular event, we focused on requirements development, as I'd mentioned. It was several days in length, John, and it included cross-agency representation. We had representatives in person from DoD, GSA, DHS, OPM, Department of State, and the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. The intended outcome was a requirements package that took into consideration and recognized the needs of those agencies that were impacted or would be impacted by the anticipated award. The structured engagement created a forum for constructive cross-agency communication, talking about lessons learned, best practices, and even anticipated agency or federal-wide changes.
The emphasis there on requirements development seems to be as much about ensuring a complete and accurate scope as it is having equal buy-in government-wide. Would that be a correct assumption?
It is, John, but I don't want to underemphasize the value of nailing down technical requirements as well as the overall scope. Within the acquisition community, and I'm certain our teammates within General Counsel would agree, that a well-written requirements package is critical. Not to mention being able to execute one in an efficient and effective manner, and as you mentioned, having that upfront buy-in from all of the stakeholders.
So what do you consider to be the greatest benefits of the discussed approach?
I would say, John, absolutely the well-written requirements package. I mentioned value earlier. You can certainly in many ways quantify that value, whether it's the industry's understanding the need to a greater extent, and the time saved in not trying to decipher or decode an unclear statement of work. You could also look at the technical requirements and the time and risk reduced during source selection, being able to have a better technical understanding and assessing technical merit. You could also, in the administrative phase, look at the post-award activities, having a very clear government deliverable. All of those benefits, they in my mind, they hit at critical phases of the total process. Being able to reduce the time, the cost, and the risk at those phases are significant benefits that we achieved through the use of the structured engagement with facilitator support.
Do you see the approach evolving or growing over time, and if so, how?
Well, in all honesty, I mean, I don't think to the acquisition community it's news. These types of approaches, the structured engagement or the use of facilitators, they're not novel ideas. The agencies have been using them for some time now. For instance, the DoD SAW is a well-established approach. But I will say, in my mind, the benefits or the innovative value is how the acquisition community is documenting and communicating their implementation of those tools. How are we taking that structured process and infusing it with further innovation to get greater benefits? For example, at OPM, we've taken the structured engagement approach, and we're currently working on trying to narrow it down, make it smaller, apply it within just our agency, using just representation across OPM. We're also taking that opportunity at the requirements development phase to try and infuse other great innovative ideas like lean canvas, prototyping and piloting, and minimum product viability. I realize that amongst all of us in the acquisition community, there isn't enough time in the day. There aren't enough hours in the day to execute the to-do list. But I do, having been through the process, having implemented, I do firmly believe that the time and effort that you save preparing, structuring the engagement is well beyond the time and effort it takes to put it into place. Not to mention, you've also got cost savings and overall reduction in risk to the agency and to the federal government.
Fantastic. That all sounds great, Greg. Hopefully, some of our viewers can take some of these ideas you've started at OPM back to their agencies to improve their acquisitions. Thank you again so very much.
Thank you.
Now let's look at a couple more real-life applications for how agencies are improving acquisitions through innovation. The Department of Homeland Security has a couple specific examples, and we have a few practitioners from DHS with us here today. Joining us now are representatives from the DHS Procurement Innovation Lab to discuss best practices tested in their lab. Polly Hall is a strategy lead for the PIL, and John Inman is a PIL senior coach. I'm now going to turn it over to Polly and John to talk a little bit about DHS's innovation model.
Thanks for having us today. So John, you ready?
I'm ready. You start us, Polly.
Terrific. The DHS Chief Procurement Officer stood up the Procurement Innovation Lab, or PIL, in March 2015 to support procurement innovation and to foster a culture of risk-taking within the DHS acquisition workforce. The DHS Acquisition Innovation Advocate serves as the PIL project lead, and DHS has also stood up an internal Acquisition Innovation Council across our components. The PIL coaches, encourages, and supports operational procurement teams and shares techniques for their consideration. Different from a red team, all decision-making responsibility and review processes for procurements that run through the PIL remains with the procurement team. Our goal is to continuously develop the DHS acquisition workforce's innovation capabilities from the ground up. The PIL process is intended to provide support to the contracting officer and to build a collaborative team early in the acquisition process. It provides a safe space where the Chief Procurement Officer can offer support to overcome barriers or obstacles and support if failures occur when teams innovate and take calculated risks. As we experiment with new approaches, we also learn from what worked and what did not, and we share these outcomes and best practices primarily through our PIL webinars. Today, we are going to share a few stories with you about how DHS procurement teams have innovated and effectively reduced time to award while increasing the quality of their award decisions. These are anecdotal experiences, but we do believe time to award is reduced by use of the following techniques. John Inman, our PIL senior coach, will first share how down selects can streamline our time to award. John, to you.
Thanks, Polly. For some acquisitions, we know we're going to get a lot of offers, in the dozens or even over 100. Sometimes we simply don't have the resources to evaluate that many offers. We're encouraging contracting officers to consider a down select process. In a down select, we evaluate all offers, maybe dozens, on a few evaluation factors, and then we evaluate only a few offers on the remaining evaluation factors. Here's an example. This was a complex acquisition for Agile software maintenance services with a plan to make 4 awards, each with an estimated value of about $100 million. We used a 3-step process to get down to the 4 awardees. The Step 1 and Step 2 evaluations were based on paper proposals, and Step 3 was an oral presentation. You can see we evaluated 43 offers in Step 1, 26 in Step 2, and 10 in Step 3, with 4 of those 10 selected for award. It was about 4 months from receipt of offers to award. For us, that was fast. But with a down select, we were also able to do oral presentations. And after awards were made, with so many unsuccessful offerers, we did group oral debriefings. We designed a down select approach that fit our acquisition. It worked for us. Polly will share another innovation example, this one from the Transportation Security Administration.
Thanks, John. TSA had a requirement for transformative Agile services, which was awarded as a $63 million competitive task order off of a DHS IDIQ. One innovation focused on streamlining the source selection process. I am going to briefly share some tips that the team identified out of their experiment. Tip number 1, skip individual evaluation documentation. The team did not formally document individual evaluations in formal reports. Instead, the evaluators read the written submissions or listened to oral presentations and took individual notes, and then went straight to consensus and only documented the outcome of the consensus decisions. Tip number 2, use visual aids to ensure consistency. The team focused its evaluation on the key differentiators of the offeror's proposals and used visual aids to ensure the consistency of its evaluation. The image you see now shows an example of a consensus evaluation board, similar to the one the team developed. This board was not used to compare the offerors, It was used to ensure that offerers were evaluated consistently. Tip number 3, agree before documenting. Following consensus, the team briefed their procurement attorney and acquisition reviewers in person on the consensus outcome using the visual aid. After the briefing, the team was able to document the consensus evaluation very easily, using the visual aid to develop the narrative. In fact, the team used the visual aid to brief the source selection authority as well, which facilitated both rigorous discussion and real-time decision-making. This innovation cut weeks off of the typical source selection timeframe. It also reduced to almost zero the amount of rewriting that was needed. The award was made within 90 days from release of the solicitation. John, can you now share an example of how we can effectively use oral presentations or technical demonstrations?
I'd be happy to. For some of our acquisitions, we have found that use of oral presentations or technical challenges is faster and more meaningful than a solely paper-based evaluation. The FAR already tells us that information pertaining to areas such as an offeror's capability, past performance, work plans or approaches, staffing approaches, transition plans, or sample tasks may be suitable for oral presentations. Think about it. If we need information for an evaluation but aren't going to incorporate that information into the resulting contract, why not let the offeror explain it in an oral presentation or show us in a demonstration or a challenge? Here's a real example in support of the E-Verify program used by employers to validate the eligibility of their employees to work in the United States. The product demonstrations were step 2 of a down select, and 3 out of the 15 offers were invited to the product demonstration. When the offerer walked in the door for the product demonstration or technical challenge, it was given a coding exercise. The government evaluators observed the performance of the team, such as for how well do they work together, and then when the offerer left, the government evaluated the code results. How else could the government select the best value offeror in an acquisition such as this, except with an oral presentation or a technical challenge? Again, the team designed their technical challenge approach to fit their acquisition. It worked for them. It worked, in fact, so well, they're using the same approach now for their follow-on acquisition. I wish we had more time.
I'm with you, John. But if you want to learn more about DHS procurement innovations, please visit our website.
Thanks, Polly and John, for that look inside the DHS pill.
Thanks for having us.
With our next guest, we're going to learn how small businesses will play a vital role in our acquisition innovations. Let's welcome Brent Maraviglia of the U.S. Digital Service. Hey Brent, thanks for taking time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the USDS?
Sure. I have a procurement background here, about 10 years within government, and I'm now at U.S. Digital Service.
For viewers who aren't familiar with the USDS, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, great question. We are a tech startup within the White House, and we bring in technologists from the commercial space and we send them into very specific agencies to work on specific tech problems, and they're applying those commercial practices that are common in the marketplace, like iterative software development and user-centered design, to solve problems to make tech better for our citizens.
Very good. How does procurement, though, fit into the U.S. Digital Service?
Yeah, thanks, John. And if you don't mind, I brought some notes with me today as well. So those teams that we send into the agencies, they can really only work on so many projects. After all, we were only about 200 people strong. But to solve IT in government in the long term, the long play, as we say, is government contracts. So most of the work, IT work in government, is done through contracts. And if you wouldn't believe it, but we actually spend about 86 billion with a B per year on IT. And then within that kind of pie chart of 86 billion, 75% of that spend annually is going to operations and maintenance. That is really just maintaining really old systems. I'm talking about some of them decades old, and they're not adding any new functionality. But we would argue that our citizens deserve better. They deserve IT to work for them like their commercial products do. So think about all the apps that you have on your smartphone and how well they work. Government IT should be able to work just as well for our citizens. So think about, for example, when you order a book off Amazon. It's easy. It's actually a pleasure to use. Government IT should be the same way.
So how well is the federal government recognizing this need?
Yeah, so we're recognizing it more and more. And for those that are recognizing the need, they really do want to get started. But there's a lot of question marks about that because we're kind of new to doing IT the way it's done in the commercial world. And there are some projects that really need to get fixed fast. So there's that question of how do we get started fast?
Great. And I've heard for quite a while that the IT procurement process takes too long a time, that tech innovations come too quickly. Isn't that problematic?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I was a IT contracting officer in several agencies, most recently at the EPA where I led a team of contracting officers. And I can't tell you how many times I got the complaint, contracts takes too long. It might take a year or two for us to get a significant acquisition done. Even writing the requirement can take quite a bit of time. So the good thing is that there's a lot of really good companies that can provide digital services to the government, both large and small. And we especially want to see companies that are exemplary in some of the digital service playbook. For instance, play number 1, understand what people need. So not building a system and in a locked up office in a federal agency and not instead going out and talking with end users and building products accordingly. Play number 4 in the digital services playbook. Build the service using agile and iterative practices. Or play number 8, choose a modern technology stack. Or play number 10, automate testing and deployments. So the good thing when you talk about speed, one good option is what the Small Business Administration has come up with, and it's called the 8A program. What the 8A program is, it's a socioeconomic program where you can award up to $4 million each, sole source. So that's a really good thing. But with that comes a catch as well. So you're actually, once the requirement goes into the 8A program, you have to receive approval from the SBA to get it out of the 8A program once the contract is done. So for that reason, unfortunately, a lot of agencies shy away from using the 8A program because they think that they're kind of locked in indefinitely.
So what kind of solution has the USDS developed to address that situation?
Yeah, so the U.S. Digital Service and with the Small Business Administration, we partnered together and to create what we call the 8A Program Digital Service Initiative, or we also call it the 8A Digital Service Initiative. And what this allows for, it gives this kind of clear, easy, fast path for agencies to get started with digital services. It increases the amount of awards given to quality 8A providers, and it reduces the administration for both the SBA and at the agency side. But here's the kicker, this is the real important thing, is that the agency can be released from the 8A program once the contract is done. So whereas before or normally you'd have to get approval from the SBA, that approval is not needed here. So an agency can do their market research, find a great 8A that's good at digital services, get started with digital services very quickly, and then be released from the 8A program should they choose to once the work is done.
Well, let's go back a bit. What's considered within scope?
Yeah, so this initiative is not for everything. There are 3 statements of objectives that we've created along with the SBA that creates the scope. They're learn the process. The second one is select the tech, and the third one is build the minimum viable product, or MVP. So I'm going to go ahead and refer to some slides that I brought along with me. First is learn the process. So what this is talking about is very much about culture change, practical application, and a retrospective. So first is the coaching. So coaching is provided to teach kind of those digital service concepts such as hypothesis development and testing those hypotheses, product vision, statement development, discovery and user research, product roadmaps, design, agile delivery techniques and methods, understanding end user needs, product management, automated testing and continuous integration, which is another word for DevOps. Also, there's this practical application. So it's not just teaching what it is, but trying to apply it to a specific need within the agency. So they're going to work with the agency to help develop a lightweight prototype or pilot of a system to start mitigating and identify the agency problem. So this would include creating a product vision, the product roadmap, writing epics and user stories, and leveraging user-centered design. It also includes iteration retrospectives, release planning, testing solutions with actual end users, and tracking success using metrics. The last part of this learn the process is a retrospective where they look back on all the work that was done within scope for the contract and noting kind of what went well, what didn't go well, and planning for next steps. So that's learn the process. The next one is select the technology. This is typically what something that we would call in US Digital Service as a discovery sprint, where we're sent into an agency. The agency maybe wants to, I don't know, say, move to the cloud as much as possible, or select a more commercial communications platform so they can communicate with the public faster and more efficiently. Or they want to move to a more common CRM. There's a number of different platforms that are available, that are out there in the commercial space, but the government may not have as in-depth knowledge as they should. So you could see this as really intense market research to determine which platform is best for the agency, and the vendor will kind of has that knowledge and can apply that to the agency's specific technology environment, kind of taking a look underneath their hood to find out, okay, since you have this technical environment, this tech stack, there are these common platforms out there in the commercial world. Here's the very specific pros and cons for each of those platforms. So at the end, also included within this statements of objectives, is kind of taking the maybe 2 or 3 best alternatives, buying, if that means like some licenses, and putting those in an environment where the agency can kind of put them in front of end users and try them out before making a final determination on which platform or which technology stack is going to work best for them. So usually the government will make that decision, and after they send out a very big request for quote, and they leave it to the vendors to propose which platforms they think would work best. Well, that's fine. The agency might have a better understanding of what technology only at that time works best. But there might be other parts of the quote that aren't really best for the government. But now the government is stuck with that vendor, even though they presented the right platform, but there are other parts of the proposal that won't work well for the government. This kind of takes that out of the equation and helps the government to make a better assessment up front. Last SOO, or the statements of objective, is to build a minimum viable product. So what this is about is discovery and design, developing an actual minimum viable product, and a retrospective. So there's a significant amount of time given to discovery and design where the government and the vendor find an agency problem and end user goals. They create a hypothesis statement or statements that can be tested by releasing a minimum viable product. So in other words, a product that has all the needs of what the thing should do, but not necessarily all the wants. And then create a product vision. And then the next step is actually developing a minimum viable product, which includes using agile software development methods to build an MVP and release it to the end users to understand what their whole experience is with that product. So there's going to be this great focus on addressing the whole experience from start to finish for the end users, making the product simple and intuitive, and only making decisions based upon data, measuring how well the product is working for those users. And then last, again, there's the retrospective, which includes a detailed look back at the project, identifying past and potential future roadblocks, and updating the product roadmap for really scaling that MVP through continuous design and agile processes.
Fantastic. Well, if that's within scope, what's not in scope?
Yeah, so really what is in scope is everything up to building a minimum viable product, but what would not be in scope is anything thereafter. So full system development would, for example, not be within scope.
Reasonable enough. Well, when will the 8A program for digital services be available to federal contracting officers?
Yeah, so many people don't know this, but it's live now. And the SBA has signed the memo. It's available on our TechFAR Hub, which you'll probably see on the screen right now.
Oh, great. So the 8A program for digital services is live and active, but I understand that the USDS has something else that you're working on to help match up agencies with great vendors. Can you tell us a little more about this?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because as I started training and going out to agencies, talking to agencies about what this digital service initiative is, they all said, great, Brent, that is awesome, but how do we know what a good digital services vendor looks like? The U.S. Digital Service partnered with OFCIO, also within the White House, and the CIO Council, which is in GSA. And we are working on what we're calling a matchmaking event, kind of like dating for the government and private industry, right? So I brought a few slides with me today, or some graphics. And so like I said, the federal government really likes this idea of this initiative. They see it as a great way to get started with digital services. But as they look at all the 8As out there, which there are hundreds of, they start thinking to themselves, okay, which one should I partner with? How do I know that they're really good at digital services? So the good thing is that there's been a lot of market research that's been done to identify really good 8A digital service providers. And we've seen their work done in making really good, cutting-edge, kind of commercial-grade products that are deployed in government and serving citizens today. So they actually have contracts. So we know of plenty of vendors that are really doing great work. So what if one day we brought together some of these great vendors that we already know about on one side, and then we also brought together agencies that had specific requirements that fit within one of these, or together some of these statements of objectives. It doesn't need to be fit necessarily in one SOO. They could combine or mix and match. But if we were to bring them together for a meeting. So imagine this. You bring together in one conference room, the federal government with their requirement that is within scope, and they sit at one end of the table. And at the other side of the table walks in an 8A vendor that's kind of pre-vetted. We know that they do good work. And maybe 2 weeks ahead of time, the agency has given that statements of objectives, their tailored SOO, to the vendor so they can kind of study ahead of time and be prepared to kind of make their pitch maybe over an hour long.
But this isn't a procurement action, correct? This is just within the 8A program?
Yeah, this is the beauty of the 8A program, is no protest risk. As you can see, if you want to look up in FAR 19.8, you can kind of work directly with vendors without the risk of protest. So really, this is not oral presentations. These are not oral quotes. This is just really good market research. Yeah, so imagine, one side of the table you have the agency, the other side you have the 8A vendor, and so say they make a 1 hour pitch, maybe even there's a lightweight prototype that they've brought, or a previous project or IT thing or application that they've made that is somewhat similar to the government's needs. So imagine the hour's over, the 8A vendor walks out, the government kind of deliberates for 15, 20 minutes, and let's say 10:30, a different 8A vendor comes in that again has seen the scope, they've received it 2 weeks ahead of time, and they give their own pitch. And then the vendor kind of walks out, again the government deliberates, everybody breaks for lunch. The whole process takes place again for a third round after lunch. And again, this doesn't need to be just one vendor. Imagine like that's just one conference room, but simultaneously there's 2 other conference rooms, maybe on a different floor, that is Agency B and Agency C, and throughout the day, they've also met with different 8A digital service vendors.
Oh, so different teams, different needs, but the same matching event?
That's right, that's right. So the plan would be that at the end of the day, each of these agencies, let's say maybe there's 3 agencies, they have each met with 3 digital service vendors that have been pre-vetted, and they have these agencies have a much better idea of who they want to go into contract with. So much that they could be thinking, okay, the first vendor was pretty good, but not the best. The second vendor was almost there, but not as good as the third vendor. We want to engage that third vendor later this week, ask for or send to them a request for proposal. We're going to be able to move pretty quickly here through RFP, receiving a proposal, a technical evaluation, negotiations, and awards. I mean, that could be done literally between the matching event and award within 2 or 3 weeks.
So going back though to the matching event, it's still considered information gathering, right? After you've gathered information for these events, now you hold the formal procurement, correct?
You've got it exactly right. So you know enough, and you can explain now that you can go and teach all the agencies for me.
Well, we'll see about that. I'm sure our viewers will be on the lookout for that. Say, can they contact you if they want to participate in these matching events?
Yes, that would be great. We are reaching out now and having kind of informal conversations with agencies, trying to find requirements, explaining what this initiative is and the matching event, to find an agency that has a burning need and they want to get started with digital services, and they could use help just like this, where we kind of facilitate something where we help them get some really good market research done so they can move quickly through the procurement process and get started with digital services. Even the end of this fiscal year, FY17 or the beginning of FY18.
Well, thank you, Brent, for being here today and helping our viewers understand how to get started with the 8A program.
Thanks for having me.
To wrap up our seminar, let's welcome Al Munoz of the General Services Administration. Hey Al, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, John.
To get started, can you give us a little background on your role at GSA and what you'll be sharing with our viewers?
Sure, so I currently work special projects for GSA, and that means a couple of different things, but my primary role is being embedded with the Technology Transformation Service and the team over at 18F.
Fantastic. So in an innovation group, what's the most important lesson for new practitioners in the acquisition field?
So there's a lot of things to think about and to be aware of when you start going down the road of doing something different, whether it's innovative IT or digital services or even strategic sourcing or category management. There's a lot of things to think about and be aware of, but the most important thing that I've found is just the need to educate. the need to talk to everybody that's going to be involved in the process from start to end and get them a comfort level, a level of familiarity with what it is that you're going to be doing so that everybody can move things along and you don't unnecessarily delay your projects, stopping to explain things that otherwise the people involved would already know. And some examples of that have been council, for example, budget and finance, the CFO organization, vendors in particular have been very interested to see what the government is thinking and what the government is contemplating doing. So there's been some education that's been needed on that side as well. But also for the CORs, the contracting team, the other folks that are going to be administering these contracts, there's a real need to have a shared understanding among all the members of the acquisition team, both sides, or all three sides, I should say, the vendor, the technical staff, and the contracting staff, so that when you start going down the road of doing this, everybody has a common understanding, a common foundation for what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Very good. What are some of the initial reactions to this wave of innovation we've been talking about throughout this seminar?
So there's been some pushback. I think practitioners, anytime you do something new, you can expect that there's going to be some pushback. And what I've found is that a lot of it is very well founded. Some of the concerns that have been raised by the vendor community, for example, are things that we just didn't think of when we started doing innovative things. We had the same experience when we started down the road of doing strategic sourcing and category management. Vendors didn't quite understand what we were getting at. There's always the commercial explanation for what strategic sourcing or category management or digital services is, and then there's the government explanation of what that is. And vendors have a real need to understand what that is if they're going to deliver that value back to the government. And there's going to be a little bit of, we've been there and done that. We heard that a lot with strategic sourcing. We're hearing it now with digital services and agile and some of the modular contracting, some of the other techniques that we're trying right now. We tried this 5 or 10 years ago or 15 or 20 years ago and it didn't work, or the FAR got in our way, or some other branch got in our way, or some other barricade got in our way and we weren't able to make it stick. So you're going to hear a little bit of that. So just be prepared for that. That doesn't take away at all from your message. It doesn't take away at all from what you're trying to accomplish and do for the American public.
Great. What should contracting teams watch out for when trying to do things more efficiently or innovatively?
Well, one of the things that you have to keep in mind when you're doing something that's different, when you're doing things that maybe your agency, your contracting office has never done before, is that you're still going to have to be aware of and follow the rules, compliance issues. If you're talking about doing IT, it doesn't really matter how new or cool that IT is. There are still things like 508 accessibility, cybersecurity, FITARA compliance. There are still things that you're going to have to be conscious of for doing things the way that the government needs them to be done legitimately. One thing that I would caution is that there's no real good reason to break the rules, right? There are some dogma, right, around the way that we do acquisition in the government that definitely does need to be broken. That's definitely something that we should make a conscious effort to even shatter, just destroy it, and have another approach. What we're doing is trying to be innovative, and we should definitely just break away from that groove that we tend to get into when it comes to acquisition. But you still have to follow the rules, right? You still have to follow the FAR. And what I would say about that is just breaking the law is not particularly innovative, right? Don't go so far off the page that you're getting cross-threaded with the regulations, with the Anti-Deficiency Act or any part of the FAR that has requirements for the contracting officer to follow. You're still going to need to do those things. And where you add value on the contracting team is helping the innovators, right? Helping the technologists, helping the vendors wend their way through that process and get to an effective contract at the end of the day.
What are the things then contracting teams should consider when trying something new? It seems contracting teams are being told to work faster, do things differently, and to take some quote-unquote risks, but there's still the FAR.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is definitely the impression that I'm seeing from my side, that not only are we being asked to do things much more quickly, but we're also being asked to do things that are very different. So it's a combination of it's different and we want to do it quickly. So there's some risk involved in that. And I think it pays to for the acquisition team to take a moment and just think about what those risks are and assess what those risks might be. We talk in acquisition about the risk of protest, or we talk about the risk of the money going to something that doesn't accomplish what it was intended to accomplish. But there are other risks involved in innovating. Certainly when you're talking about IT and digital services, cybersecurity, for example, is a risk that you should be aware of. There are other risks out there, and it doesn't really matter what you're doing. If it's IT or professional services, or if it's strategic sourcing or category management, there are different sets of risks involved in each one of those new methods of doing things in acquisition. And it will be worth your time to take a few moments and to talk about that with your vendors, talk about it with counsel, talk about it with the acquisition team and the technologists and the technology that you're trying to bring into the government.
So be innovative, but be smart. That's great, Al. Thanks for joining us and sharing these great tips to help our audience implement innovative ideas and solutions at their agencies.
Thanks again for having me, John.
We're glad you've taken the time to experience this presentation about innovations in acquisitions. We look forward to the great questions you'll submit for our presenters by September 29, 2017, and we'll post the answers along with this presentation. The Federal Acquisition Institute thanks Eliana Zavala, Greg Blaschko, Holly Hall, John Inman, Brent Maravilla, and Al Munoz. And of course, FAI thanks you, our viewers, for your time and attention.